Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know it's been an exciting couple of days here at the North Capital Forum. We have the cherry on top to those 2 incredible days with the presence of the President and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Børge Brende. We live in a complex world where clarity is in short supply. Progress doesn't come necessarily from certainty, but more and more from our ability to learn, to listen, and to cooperate with each other. This session is an opportunity to connect a global vision with local purpose, at least regional purpose, and the conversations that bring us together are more important than ever. So I appreciate Børge Brende being here today. I've made a sort of a use of the power of the moderator to choose a few topics that hopefully will create value to our audience. And again, Børge, welcome back to Mexico. It's great to see you here.
Muchas gracias. Great to be here.
The World Economic Forum, I was just talking about dialogue, about conversations that bring us together, about providing clarity in a very complex, very divided world. That seems to be at the heart of what the World Economic Forum has done for so many years.
That's true, and at the same time, it's more complicated than in a long time. I think the geopolitical backdrop that this meeting is happening against is probably the most complicated one since the Second World War.
Yes.
So there's a lot of talk about tariffs. I guess you heard the word tariff mentioned also here in Mexico. I would say that the highest tariff we're faced with is uncertainty now. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of uncertainty about what the future will bring. But if you're going to look at it from a glass half full instead of half empty, the global economy is doing relatively well compared to all the geopolitical turmoil that we have been facing. The economy is quite resilient. We even increased the growth predictions for this year globally from 2.8 to 3%. And of course, it is not what was the trend growth for decades. We had the trend growth closer to 4%. So it's still not where we want to be, but at least we don't have a recession.
No economic crisis so far. You're talking about uncertainty, and I have a question about how democracies around the world seem to be under pressure, under strain from populist movements, from disinformation and uncertainty. Is this a temporary wave, or do you see this as a deeper realignment in the world order?
I hope it's temporary.
We all do.
But I'm not certain. We will need to deal with the fact that social media has changed the way people gather information and the way people process information. When you and I grew up, we probably read edited newspapers where the editor-in-chief had his or her pride in every word and every sentence and every fact being correct. And today, in the social media, there is not that kind of editing. So you have to take with a big pinch of salt what you're reading. That's is not necessarily the case. And as you know, if you first start to read something, that's your preference in the algorithm, then will feed you with more of that kind of information. And that is a challenge for all democracies. So if you don't have a good TikTok account or is not good at presenting things in like 10 seconds, you have big challenges in the campaigns. But still, I do think that the people living in democracies today do prefer to be able to elect their leaders also in the future. Yeah. The challenge is that there is also a lot of expectations to the leaders, and there is a lot of structural changes that have to happen if you're going to still be prosperous. So I think a lot of leaders do know what they should do, but they don't know how to do it and be re-elected.
we talk a lot about nowadays, unfortunately, about hate, about anger. Today is October 7th, 2 years since the terrible attacks in the south of Israel and the conflict that's derived into in the Middle East. But we point fingers at technology. I certainly do when it comes to the toxicity on social media and digital platforms. But are we underestimating how much of that anger is actually justified when we think we're coming out of one of the worst economic recessions in history in 2008, 9, 10, a pandemic, this realignment of the world order, the conflicts we're seeing? Are we not sensible enough to how these economic frustrations, these demographic anxieties that have resulted from all of these changes?
So many critical observations in that question. So sometimes we are also maybe painting too black what we have achieved during the last 3 decades.
Very true.
So if you look at 1990 and until today, we went from 40% of the people on our planet living in extreme poverty to around 12% today. And we added from 5 billion people to 7.5 billion people. So it's extraordinary. Extraordinary. Never happened in humankind's history. At the same time, that globalization led to a situation where then emerging economies and developing economies had access to markets and started to compete with traditional industry, blue-collar workers in many industrialized countries. And that led also to frustrations, and also a lot of people felt that they were not better off, right? That could, of course, have been addressed, the inequalities, also domestically in these countries. So there are tools in the toolkit for leaders to address that, but you need then to use these tools. Now we are in a situation where there is less globalization. There maybe is a re-globalization around the corner, who knows? I think what we're seeing is that trade, that was the driver of the growth in the 3 last decades. Trade grew double the global growth.
GDP.
Is not much less than the global growth. So if global growth is like 3% this year, trade in manufactured goods is almost not increasing. Maybe it's even contracting, and the trade in digital trade and services increases. Why am I mentioning this is that we are faced now with a new situation where the driver of growth are the technologies. They will increase productivity with numbers that we haven't seen for decades, maybe haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution. But how will this pan out? Will it be the winner takes it all? Or will this be evenly distributed? Will it create new opportunities that we haven't seen before? I think the jury is out there.
Actually, I have a question about that, because just like you say, the global economy is undergoing this transformation, and it's been driven by technology, by AI, artificial intelligence, and more green energy shift. I believe today, for the first time, we surpassed the amount of energy being created by alternative energies than the one coming from older sources. So all this wealth, all this concentration of wealth has created also increasingly more inequality. That wealth seems to be concentrated in fewer hands. We have the not millionaires or billionaires, now we have the uber rich. How do we make sure, especially through the work of the World Economic Forum, that everyone is welcomed and everyone is part of this transformation of the global economy?
So just coming back to what I said about the overall numbers for the 3 last decades, though, If you went from 40% and living in extreme poverty to 10% or 12%, that is a decrease in global inequalities that we have not seen for maybe ever. But as you are alluding to, there is, especially in some developed countries, but also in some emerging countries, the platform economy, the social media platform economy, was an economy where the winner took it all. So there were clear winners, and if you were on the same teams as them, you came out pretty well. But it's also created a lot of wealth, and that wealth has also accumulated. So there are different approaches to this, and that's why I mentioned the toolkit. I'm biased as I'm from the Nordic countries, but the Nordic countries are around 30 million. They're the maybe 10th largest economy in the world if you add them together. They have seen still a lot of growth, but they have not seen an increase in the Gini coefficient. They have been able to also make sure that wealth trickles down, and they have used the tools in the toolkit. They don't have, for example, regressive taxes. They have progressive taxes. But that's a political decision that per se the World Economic Forum doesn't get into, but we can lay out the different tools you have. There's also difficult trade-offs here, of course. If you go too far in risk distribution, you can also kill growth. Right. So then you have a smaller pie and you can slice this differently. I think we all want to grow a bigger pie, and then you can also slice that pie in a way that you make sure that there is a legitimacy related to the market economy. If wealth doesn't trickle down, I think the legitimacy can easily then erode.
Trying to place the conversation here in Mexico, much of the 20th century was defined by the West setting the global agenda, even at forums like the World Economic Forum. With the Global South, what we call the Global South now, driving growth and innovation, how do you see power shifting in the global conversation?
So at the World Economic Forum, we always took pride in being as Asian as we are European or Latin American, North American. We have 930 of the leading companies in the world as our partners, and they're from all over the world. So I think we're reflecting the global reality. It is true that things are changing when it comes to also the epicenters in the world. But it's not a linear development. Let's not forget that your neighbor in the north, the United States of America, is still 25% of the global economy and 5% of the global population. That has been for decades. They have not decreased their amount of global GDP. There's still, you can even argue that they have increased 1 or 2 percentage points of the pie. This is because of the new technologies. They're now so invested and they're driving, the US economy is driven by artificial intelligence and frontier technologies. Then you do have the second largest economy in the world is China, 18%. So together this G2 is very powerful. But one nation that is to reckon in this and that confirms the premises in your question is India. That's now the fastest of the large economies in the world, 7% growth this year, and contributing to overall 18% of all global growth is coming from India. But then, if you want to be a little bit concerned, is that what we thought was going to be like a linear, unavoidable, but a positive aspect was the emerging economies and developing economies because of population growth, and all this was going to take a bigger share of the pie. What we have seen last year was that, for example, foreign direct investments in emerging economies and developing economies went down 7%. So lately we have seen capital, because of the uncertainties, also going to the more traditional economies. So if we're going to see growth in Africa and continue to see growth in Asia, we also need to see that capital goes to these countries to develop. So there are some tricky things ahead of us, I have to say. I do think, though, that we will continue to see global growth, provided there is no major wars. We have wars, as you mentioned. We have the war in Gaza, we have the war in Ukraine, but we avoided the situation with Iran to turn into a major disruption.
Now that you mentioned war, I believe 2023 was the first time that the World Economic Forum was being held, the annual meeting, because you have meetings, like you say, all over the world in different regions, but the annual meeting in Davos was being held for the first time at the same time that there was an ongoing war in Europe, just miles away from Switzerland. How has that changed the purpose of the forum, the objectives in the short term of the World Economic Forum, in terms of how much it's being security focused now because of this war?
So since the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014, that was a game changer in itself. And then we had the major attack on the whole Donbass, and also trying to capture the whole country. I think what we learned from that, though, even if you're a large military power like Russia, it's hard. If a nation doesn't want a big power to invade, they can be very resilient. I think Mr. Putin should have read a little bit more about what the U.S. have faced. U.S. has probably 45% of the global military power too, on top of the other numbers I mentioned previously. But look at Afghanistan. After we have used billions of US dollars for 20 years, first one got rid of Taliban, and now Taliban is back after 20 years.
$1 trillion, thousands of deaths.
Trillions of dollars, lot of people, lot of body bags, and now Taliban is in charge in Kabul. Women cannot leave their houses, girls cannot be educated. It's a catastrophe. But it shows that even superpowers are without superpowers. We saw that in Vietnam, we saw it in Iraq, and Mr. Putin has now experienced it in Ukraine. Ukraine is now the 6th largest military power in the world, and they're now striking inside Russia, taking out 30-40% of their refinery capabilities. Putin thought he was going to take Ukraine in a week. That didn't happen, and now he has got Sweden and Finland as NATO members. He's not printing money by selling natural gas to Europe. That gas is stranded, and he's probably lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Ukraine. So that war needs to come to an end, and sooner than later. But of course, also respecting the principles in international law.
For those of you who don't know, before being the president and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Børge Brende was the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. So I'm guessing you believe in diplomacy and you believe in the power of dialogue. This only to say that we recently had the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and more we're seeing how international institutions that were built after World War II are not up to the challenge because they're either understaffed, underfinanced, they don't have a mandate to deal with the big challenges of our time: climate change, pandemics, even issues of war and peace. Should we be thinking about designing a new institutional, like international institutions that can deal with these challenges? And what role does the World Economic Forum has in building that structure?
So we don't have any role in building such a structure. We are impartial international organization that bring people together. On our platform, there can be discussions about how we can also make the multilateral organization more adapted to the new realities that we are facing. These institutions were built after the Second World War, Bretton Woods and the UN, and they, of course, need to reform. But we shouldn't lose the baby with the bathwater either. The challenges, as you're also indicating in the question, some of the most pressing questions that we're faced with are global.
Correct.
So if a question is global, you cannot solve it only in your nation. Like the pandemic. I think we learned from the pandemic, the pandemic goes global immediately, or it lasts after some months. And, this pandemic that we faced this time was a mild one. Just imagine if we get a pandemic that doesn't attack children, and not only vulnerable children, but children. We need to then also deal with challenges that don't travel with a passport, being future pandemics. Need to be a global approach, cannot only be a country approach. But what we're seeing now is every country has gone MAGA. It's not only the US that is now make America great again, it's like make India great again, make China great again.
England, we saw that recently.
Yeah. Well, but we have to be real politicians in the sense that when we have this MAGA approach, there's also overlap in their MAGA priorities and interests. So what we're trying to do at the World Economic Forum is then to identify areas where there's still in their interest to collaborate. Take, for example, cybercrime. We're probably losing 4 or 5 trillion US dollars in cybercrime.
Correct.
This year. So I think even China and the US can easily agree that criminal gangs and others stealing 4 to 5 trillions through cybercrime is not a good thing. So they can agree to fight that. They, of course, will have their cyber things between themselves, but that is state actors. But that's also why I think we would see much more so-called plurilateral agreements moving forward, meaning that there are coalitions of willing. So if you then meet an impasse in WTO, no, there is no agreement of having a global service trade agreement or an agreement on digital trade. Why don't then 70, 80 nations come together? We agree to do that. And then the others can sit on the fence if they want to. And this is why I also believe in, for example, now EU went to Mercosur to EU. They made an agreement. EU now goes to India. Hopefully they will make an agreement. So it's a much different approach from in the past. But that's the reality. You just have to deal with it in a MAGA world.
I think you've shared a global outlook. Then we talked about the global economy, security issues. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about climate now, which is related to all of the above. Really, it's not just an environmental issue. And it's increasingly driving conflict and political instability for governments and businesses. If you had to name one region that's most at risk of climate-driven stability or even conflict in the next few years, in the next decade, I know it's not fair to make you take out the crystal ball and sort of see into the future, but what region would that be?
I think it's hard to give that answer. You know, we saw the wildfires in Los Angeles. Thousands of people lost their homes. We also have seen severe floodings now in South Asia. The reality is that the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action. So, but this is hard to drill down. So, politics maybe have changed, but unfortunately, science hasn't changed. So there are realities there that we have to deal with. And we are also seeing, as was mentioned, Enrique, in the beginning, from your side, that the green transition of energy production has already started. And it is like a snowball effect.
It is.
If the snowball starts a little, it can get, it gets more and more speed, and then it gets bigger and bigger. So, if we have met 10 years ago and I said that the price of solar would be 1/10, and it would be possible to install solar without any kind of subsidies, it would be the cheapest electricity you could build out, people would say, no, you're very blue-eyed, Børge. That's naive. But that's the reality now, that we're seeing these electrostates developing. China is becoming more and more of an electrostate. So the cars are more and more going on electricity. We're seeing the trains go on electricity. More and more is now electrified.
And they dominate solar production.
Exactly. And I think the good thing also with some of these new energy sources is that they kind of freedom fuels. Like if you have domestic electricity production based on these renewables, you don't have to import it. And the biggest change in many ways is that, the oil industry had monopoly on everything that was going to move. Of course, trucks and cars. That was, you had to put gas into them. Today, in many countries, 70 to 80% of the new cars are electric cars, EVs. So there is a change. But energy is also extremely complex. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Because one thing is that you have to have this decoupling of energy and emissions. But you also have to have access to energy. And this cannot be solved overnight. I think that's been a problem, because there's 700 million people on this planet that don't have access to energy, electricity at all. You can't tell them, oh no, you have to wait, we can't give you electricity because we're worried about so-and-so. No, they will need to have the same access as the ones in the developed world. And that is energy security too. We have seen that in Europe. Suddenly overnight, 40% of the gas was gone. And Europe has now to buy LNG 3 times the price of what was bought from Russia. And that has also had a severe impact on the industry. So there is a triangle. So, when we build the whole industrial revolution on fossil fuels, you don't stop fossil fuels overnight. That's not possible. So you need to move away from the most heavy fossil fuels like coal to gas that emits half. Then you also have to be more into capturing and storage. And then you'll find energy solutions in the future. And with all the new technologies now, you're accelerating these processes. For example, with fusion, if you said that fusion would be accessible in the next decade, people just a year ago would maybe say that is naive, but because of the new algorithms, the research there now is accelerating so fast that you can maybe produce nuclear without any risk of a meltdown. Like it's a real black box, it's no meltdown, and doesn't create the future waste in the same way. So it's a real win-win.
And I think it's important to say that you've worked with governments, with states, and also with the private sector in achieving solutions, because at first I think there was this perception that companies were part of the problem, and more they're being part of the solution. So I think, especially for our audience here today, it's important to understand the role companies have in creating better conditions in terms of the climate. In my
Can I just add one thing
course.
there? Is that governments have not been so indebted since 1945, and some haven't been so indebted since the Napoleonic Wars. The companies are not indebted overall. So if you want to achieve anything in the future, you also have to bring the private sector on board.
I've been privileged to be part of the World Economic Forum community for many years, and every time I have the chance to go to one of the meetings in Asia, here in Latin America, of course in Davos, I leave inspired. And it's hard to communicate that because people will think, I mean, that sounds kind of cursi, that sounds kind of corny. It is not. You have connections and conversations that leave you with new ideas, with a renewed sense of optimism about how to change the world. So I want to share that with our audience here today and take advantage that you're here today, Borgen. In an era where technology and capital often move faster than political accountability, what do you believe is the most urgent ethical questions leaders should be asking themselves?
I think leaders will need to make sure that they create the necessary opportunities for the young people in their societies. But that opportunity should not compromise on the values that our democracies should be built on, if it's in a democracy, and also that it doesn't send bills to the future generations. I do think, though, that we are, as I said initially, at the crossroads. But overall, if you ask me, I'm not a pessimist, I am an optimist, because I think those new technologies will bring a paradigm shift where you can produce more effectively in the future with less use of resources, and we can see more prosperity, and we can continue to kill poverty. It is, of course, one of the questions I get most frequently is, oh, what will people do when they lose their job with the AI? And then I use Switzerland as an example, the country where the World Economic Forum is based. 97% of the population used to work in the agriculture sector in Switzerland less than 100 years ago. And now 2% works in the agriculture sector, and they produce 3 times more food than 100 years ago. And they just said, oh, we don't want to have everyone in the agriculture sector. So someone started to make watches, someone started banks, and someone started pharmaceuticals, someone started to do other things higher up in the value chain. And Switzerland is now probably the richest country in the world because they were willing to make their agriculture more effective, and they were willing to move from one sector to other sectors. In my view, there is no reason to believe that will not happen also in the future. So I think we'll be fine.
I like that you're an optimist. I once heard someone say that an optimist is a pessimist, but with good information. So welcome to the club. Finally, Mexico has its first female president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She's now leading one of the world's largest democracies at a critical time, like we've discussed throughout this last half an hour. How do you assess her leadership until now?
So we're very pleased that the collaboration with the first female president in Mexico, something that I think is a major achievement in itself, is going really well. Tomorrow we're bringing 60 global business leaders here to Mexico, together with Marisol Argueta, our Latin America director. Please stand up, Marisol. Great friend and made this also doable. So we're bringing Larry Fink, our co-chair, head of BlackRock, managing $14 trillion in asset management. We have Mark Benioff, Salesforce, FedEx CEOs, and everything coming to Mexico, looking at opportunities. And I think it also shows that the president really cares about also growth, meeting with these international business leaders and Mexican business leaders to carve out a way for also Mexico to revive growth, making sure that there are further investments in this country. And I'm also optimistic on behalf of Mexico. There's a lot of young people. There's more than 130 million people, 15th largest economy in the world, well situated with the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, or there's no reason why Mexico shouldn't become a really rich country in the future. It's up now to the Mexicans.
Well, thank you so much. I started the conversation saying that we live in a complex world and that clarity is in short supply. So I think, at least for me, this conversation brought a lot of clarity, and I thank Børge Brende for that. And again, welcome back to Mexico. It's great to have the World Economic Forum with us again. Thank you, Børge. Thank you, everyone.